This episode of Pick Up the Six podcast is brought to you by Everyman Jack. If you haven't heard of them, they're a men's grooming company that creates some of the highest performing, best smelling products on the market. They believe it's not just about what you put in your body that matters, but what you put on your body, from their body wash to deodorant to beard oil and more. They're made with naturally derived ingredients and incredibly outdoorsy scents that bring the best of nature to their bottles and bars. I'm a huge fan of all their stuff. The sandalwood scent, probably my favorite of all the things they have. And it's literally in my shower right now. So here's what you do. Head to everymanjack.com today and use our special promo code PUT6, PUT and the number 6 for 25% off on orders of $50 or more. Making small changes to your routine, even in the shower, can have a significant impact. And Everyman Jack makes that easy. Everyman Jack, naturally derived, outdoor inspired. We're also sponsored by Amino Vitals. Amino Vitals' mission is to provide the highest quality of amino acid-based nutritional products to all athletes aspiring to improve their conditioning and performance. The BCAAs, glutamine and arginine, help replenish the body's muscle proteins and jumpstart the recovery process. I've been using Amino Vital since last fall, got introduced to them, and I see a positive impact from their action and recovery products. It helps me just get rid of some of those, aches and pains that come with a tough workout. Hit up amino-vital.com, use the code PUT6 at checkout and save 20%, or just click on their link on the show page and save today. Eric Springer joins the podcast today, and he's a self-described human Swiss Army knife, an Air Force veteran having spent time as a commander and then heavily involved in Special Operations Command. You might see where that Swiss Army knife reference comes from. But what's that multi-tooled asset to do when transitioning from military to civilian life? It was a real challenge for Eric at first, but he had a breakthrough, and he shares a secret to success and fulfillment with you on this episode of Pick Up the Six podcast. Hey guys, Brian Jodis back with another episode of Pick Up the Six podcast. We're going to meet our friend Eric Springer here in a second. I got to give a shout out to my man Jeff Forrester for making the connection here. Longtime friend of the show. He's been on our podcast before. Jeff Forrester, great dude. He got us connected with Eric. He's like, listen, I just had Eric on my podcast. I think it's called Pathways to Greatness, episode number 7, which I would encourage you guys to go listen to. Listen to this one first, then go back and listen to Jeff's. He's like, but you got to have this guy on. He totally fits the Pick Up the Six model. So thrilled for you guys to get to know him. Thankful for our sponsors that we talked about on the front half of the show. And a reminder, we're not just a podcast here at Pick Up the Six. We're also a media production company with the mission to really create purpose-driven content for our clients and our partners. And so if you need anything on that front, send me an email. We'd love to have the chance to team up with you and help you bring your stories to life. And that's part of what we do here through these podcast stories, is sharing stories about service, purpose, and impact with cool people that we meet along the way. And one of those is my man, Eric Springer, who joins us today. So Eric, thanks for being with us.
Hey, it's great to be here, Brian. And I'm excited to spend this hour with you, man.
Me too. Whenever a friend reaches out and says, I got somebody for you, I've never had that happen and it not be worth exploring. And in fact, you and I, we've been lining this up for, I think, a couple months at this point. We got a chance to chat on the phone for a while, and we're just kind of on fire. We got a lot of things in common, a lot of things we care about, a lot of things we're sort of seeing happening in our worlds that we care about. So I'm just excited to get into all that, talk about the great work you're doing with Admired Leadership, what you learned and took throughout your illustrious career in the United States Air Force, and how it's sort of into kind of 2.0, right? What the next phase looks like. So thrilled, man, just to chat some.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a pretty good story, I think. The transition, and also taking everything from, to almost 25 years in active duty into the next chapter of life here, and really finding purpose going forward too.
Well, let's get in the Wayback Machine and go back, man. Kid who ends up at United States Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, Colorado. I got our little Air Force Falcons football helmet back there amongst our collection of mini helmets. My dad did not go to the Air Force Academy, but we've always pulled for the Falcons when it comes down to the Commander's Cup with that Air Force background. So how'd you end up at Colorado Springs, man? What was that path and that journey like?
So I actually grew up as a military kid, similar to you, Brian, and my dad was Army, and I spent most of my life growing up in Germany.
Hmm.
My mom was German, green card holder, became a citizen a few years back, and if you can think back to the bad old days of the Cold War and those kind of times in Europe at the time, it was not uncommon to be walking home from school and all of a sudden there's tanks rolling down the road and you don't know if this is for real
Wow.
or if this is an exercise and so that has an impression on you as a young person. And then I ended up doing back in those days we used to do crazy things like go on school field trips to East Germany and see things like that, and you got to very starkly see what communism and oppression was like.
Hmm.
And one of the things I remember very clearly is going into the East, and it's amazing how these memories get seared into your hippocampus, your brain. But I remember that as a young person, I think I was like 8 years old, and all of a sudden I could tell there was no color. Everything was drab gray.
Wow.
The buildings were drab gray. The cars were drab gray. The clothing was drab gray. And the only color you really saw and sometimes was we went to a school and they had communist youth with the scarves on, and that was the only color you saw. And so uh, and another impressive aspect of that trip was that I got to see uh, the tour guide not being able to really speak her mind freely and
Hmm.
share her thoughts and opinions about what was going on. And so at a young age, I was kind of impressed with there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and I'm going to try to be on the right side of things. And then I'll be honest, the Air Force compared to the Army or the other service, my dad was Army, got me simply probably because my dad was Army and I was not going to go down the exact same path as him. I remember as a kid growing up that the Air Force kids, had a little bit better on their bases that as the Army kids did, and so I was going to do it my own way. And then I think we went to an air show at Ramstein Air Base,
Hmm.
and I got to climb in the jets as a kid afterwards,
Just
and so
saw that, right? You're
they
like,
got me.
dude, this is awesome. Yeah.
I was hooked at that point. Now I didn't end up flying, in the Air Force, but so that's how they, got me there. But as with many things in life, what got you there isn't what kept you there, right?
Hmm.
It's the sense of familial bonds that you built with the people that you served with, and the sense of loyalty you have to the team and to the mission that kept me going over the years and sustained me.
Yeah. You talked about all those years, man, end up retiring as a colonel. You're flight commander, squadron commander. You've got experience in special operations in the Air Force. So once you get out of the academy, right, you're commissioned in the Air Force. Like, what's your job? What are you going to do? Right. Guys go to be, fighter pilots. They go to, there's all these different areas of the Air Force, right? What are you going to do?
Yeah, so I ended up becoming a security forces officer for the Air Force, and I was looking for to find the quickest thing that could get me to leading people and having a rifle in my hands and doing things in parts of the world that most people don't go. And I think when I tallied it all up at the end of my career, I think it was 61 countries that I
Wow.
operated in and did operations and led people in. And so that was what I was trying to do. And I ended up my first assignment was in New Jersey, and I got into what was called the Raven program there, which is kind of a security commando deployable anti-terrorist team tied to mobility aircraft, and that took me all over Africa and South America and Central America doing different operations. And then I essentially had the mentality of I wanted to go see as much as the Air Force as I could, not just stay in one aspect of operationally. So I didn't want to just be in air combat command or a special operations command, but I wanted to see everything. So I went to the Pacific next. I went to spend a year in Korea. Then I went to Europe after that. Spent 3 years there with operations
Where was your year?
overseeing
Where was your year in Korea?
Kunsan.
Okay. Yeah. My dad had
So on the Yellow
Osan when
Sea
I
on the
was a
west
kid.
coast.
Nice.
Yeah, and definitely a great operations there. A lot of ground combat, a lot of training in perimeter defense and those kind of things, and mortar systems and all that kind of stuff was fun out there. And it's great to still have relationships with a lot of people that I served with in each of these roles.
Mm-hmm.
But you also got to see I was single at the time, and got to see a whole aspect of Korea as an up and coming country and developing. And I remember obviously, I used to joke with my kids that, you know, I was into Gangnam Style before Gangnam Style was a thing, you know, because we used to go up to Seoul, and that was the posh part of Seoul where you get your shopping done. But you know, the Air Force made all those kind of things a reality, and made them possible for me to see a different aspect of how people think about thinking and how they approach culture and life. And then I followed that up with a first assignment out of 3 in Germany, along with times in Bosnia and Croatia and in, you know, former Yugoslavia as part of Joint Force, Joint Guardian, and then into the invasion of Iraq at the end of 2003, and took that from there to Idaho, leading in Squadron Air as operations officer, and then another trip to Iraq in 2005, and then I spent a couple of years with the Army on exchange, which is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that in the bio, man. So you finally got your Army time. So the old man's happy, funny, right?
Yeah. Well, he used to joke that, you know, I joined the Air Force to become an Army guy, because essentially what I did in the Air Force was.
Well, I said, you know, I was thinking in my head, you know, all jokes aside, you're like, get a rifle in my hand as fast as I can. I'm like, oh, well, he's an Army kid that wears an Air Force uniform. It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because sometimes there were times, and I think, you know, most defenders feel this way, that, you know, you feel like you're this child between 2 parents that, you know, nobody really wants you, you know. Sometimes you're in the Air Force, you're some of these grunts that are running around with, you know, rifles and grenades and machine guns, and then the Army looks at you and like, "Oh, you're those Air Force guys." So it's
right. Hey, so in that 2-year sort of, you know, you call it like a loaner program, what are you doing? I mean, are you in the Army for those 2 years? Are you in Army uniform, right? Like how's that work?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm wearing an Air Force uniform, but I'm in an Army unit, and there's an Army guy that's over in an Air Force unit.
Gotcha.
And
player exchange, kind of, really.
Player exchange kind of thing. Yeah. And the idea, it's different than working together with somebody. It's actually you're part of them. So I went to Iraq with them in 2008 as a soldier might, right? In the same capacity and the same kind of design and execution as a soldier might in an Army unit. And so that gives you a different perspective. And I learned most of obviously there are great relationships there. One of the biggest things is how difficult it was sometimes because of the different parochial pride that the services have in pushing information in both directions and saying, hey, this is how the Army might approach this problem, or this is how the Air Force might do it. One of those things I picked up is if we're dealing with a problem, and if I said, hey, Eric Springer had a great idea last night, you know, we should do it this way. And everybody be like, yeah, it's the greatest thing ever. I'm so glad you came up with that. And if I were to say, well, this is how this other service does it, then no, we're never going to do that. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And so you started to learn when was the right time to actually, you know, put the full picture out there, or when was the right time to kind of lead with context and show somebody just a different perspective. But I really enjoyed that time with them, and followed that up with going to more Army Command and Staff College, and then I took command of a unit down in Las Vegas, working out there and at Nellis, and also out of Creech out in the desert, doing different kind of ground combat training and different kinds of security operations out of there, with a deployment to Afghanistan in between, running the development of police from the central part of the country all the way out to the Pakistani border, and then from the Panjshir Valley basically down to RC South. So huge operation. Obviously, lots of Afghans that we were recruiting, training, and developing, but also working with people from all of our NATO partners in that effort. So putting them together in a high performing team was definitely a lot of fun. And then back to Germany, commanding a unit out there near Ramstein. Back to the States, kind of St. Louis area, Scott. They were doing some of the Raven operations again, and some of the security for mobility, and then out to Lackland to run the schoolhouse for SF, along with and our brothers over in the same group and special ops, and doing the INDOC course out there, and running all the advanced programs for SF at that point, and then following that up to gosh, I guess I gave you a long version here. Back out to Germany to do some time with Africa Command, doing some of the Africa operations again, and really that's how I got yanked from there back to Special Ops and Special Operations Command Central, and spending the last 3.5 years of my career out there with them. Most of that time spent in team rooms and team houses that nobody knows about, with a small handfuls of people that were doing the nation's work. And
what are those? What units are you working with in that capacity? You don't have to tell us, obviously, specific names or anything like that. But I mean, is it PJs? Is it combat controllers? Is it pararescue men? Like, what do those groups look like?
It's everything. So Special Operations Command Central is obviously all special operations in the Middle East, and from the operational capacity, right? So the Navy's going to maintain administrative, obviously, control of their SEALs, as the Army will of their Green Berets, and the Marines of their Raiders. But once they go operational, they're ours in that sense of what they're doing operationally. And so making sure we're doing the right thing, making sure we're integrated. And so I may, obviously, on one mission, be out there spending time with people from all those different services.
You know what I'm hearing from you, Eric, every step of the way is just so much relationship building that's got to be a part of this. You think about being a flight commander, squadron commander, relationships with all those that serve with and under you, working in security forces in foreign countries, right? Some that aren't that thrilled that we're there to begin with. Relationship. And then bringing all these special operators who you just told us, right? And we know they got their piece of the pie, man. Like, they got their guys they got to be aware of and take care of. SEALs, Green Berets, Raiders, combat controllers, like all of that, and all the other components that go with it, and having to bring relationship to bring that together. So it's an incredible career and a life of relationship. And I wonder if that's why you refer to yourself as a human Swiss Army knife, right? You got to be able to do so many things.
Yeah, I think that's a significant part of it. I mean, I would say I learned to be very relational with people. And I think that one of the key aspects of leadership is knowing your people very well, almost better than they know themselves, and playing them to their strengths and reinforcing blind spots. And that takes time, and that takes relational closeness, and that takes you really understanding why they are who they are, what were the formative experiences in their life that led them to believe the things that they do. And with that knowledge, how can you do the best for them and with them? And so I'm about going deep when it comes to people and developing relationships. Very little that I do is transactional. Maybe if the plumber is over here at the house or something like that,
you're still probably talking to him.
I'm still probably talking to him. I'm still probably developing a relationship there because I want to know, I want to understand, right? How did you diagnose this problem? And so for me, every single person that I've met is a question that I'm trying to answer. And was that something I developed, or was that something that I practiced? I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's both of those aspects came together in developing that quality.
What was a step along the way where you had to learn the hard way, where failure came into play that helped you continue to accelerate your career?
Yeah, I never really would say that I failed in anything. I would say that there were always times when I was learning. And sometimes those lessons were a little bit painful. Obviously, I've lost guys on the battlefield, and that's something you don't get back. Outside of those very painful experiences of having people die, and obviously questioning whether you could have prevented that by being more insightful or more aggressive or more thoughtful in what the range of possibilities were. I would say that one of the biggest examples for me is, one of the things you're never supposed to do when you take command of or a leadership position is you're supposed to be kind of in this listen mode and observe and hear. And the first time I took command of a unit, I was doing it all wrong. I came in and I had the vision and mission statement written before I even showed up, right? And here's all the things that we're going to accomplish in the next 6 months and in the next year, and here's all the metrics we're going to use. A good chief actually leading me, pulled me aside and said, sir, this unit, half of this unit's been in combat this past year. You had guys lose limbs, get seriously injured. You may want to spend some time thinking about who we need you to be as opposed to what you want us to do. And that was a damn good point. And so we focused on on the team. We focused on developing a highly performing team that not only included the people that were in uniform, but the families and being holistic. And the crazy thing is we actually got at all the other objectives that I set out to do, but we were more effective in doing so because we focused on that team first. And so that was a key. I wouldn't call that a failure. I would say that was something that I learned, and I'm still learning lessons every single day. So I consider that to be part of life. And for me, there's a great book, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, that I would say I purposely seek out adversity as opposed to stability and resilience and comfort, because I know I'm going to grow and learn from that experience. So there's going to be times when I step all over myself in the pursuit of adversity.
Yep.
And there's going to be times when maybe I bit off a little too much, more than I could chew at that point in time, but I'm going to get there.
Yep.
And the way to do, and this is, you'll hear me say this all the time. I've probably said it to Jeff, and I say it to everyone I engage with, is that the way to do hard things is to start doing hard things.
Yeah. Seek them out. Seek them out, right? That bed in the morning is super comfortable. Man, it's so comfortable. Like, it's warm. Got my spouse in there. Like, that bed is comfortable. But if I get myself up at 4:30 or 5 and start the day by doing something a little uncomfortable outside, like, for me, that it's got to be that. Even like going to work out in the morning, going to at a gym outside, whatever, getting up and doing that. For me, as the first part of the day, I'm at least checking. Listen, I ain't putting myself in serious harm's risk or anything, but I'm at least checking the adversity box, doing something difficult. Maybe even just getting up and getting moving. And this audience knows, because we talk about it all the time, is you've just got to seek it. You've got to go find it. You got to put yourself in situations that are a little uncomfortable. Maybe it's starting a business. Maybe it's the way in which you manage your books. Maybe it's the way in which you have to have conversations with your spouse about the hard things going on in your marriage. That's uncomfortable, but it's not going to like pull you aside and be like, hey, you have to do this. Like, you've got to go find a little bit of it. And through the other side of it is some acceleration, I think. By seeking some
embrace the things that scare you, that make you uncomfortable, run towards them, embrace them, and take the things that you thought were impossible and make them possible.
I heard the analogy of being the buffalo. So if a storm's coming, like a tornado in the Midwest, the cows will run away from it. The buffalo will run towards it. By running away from it, it's going to ultimately catch up to you, and it's going to whip you in to the storm. But by running towards it, you just take it head on and you push right through it. So I think it's a pretty.
And you and I both, Brian, want to be the storm.
Heck, I'm like the buffalo in the storm. Sometimes I don't know, but we're going. Either way, we're going. No, man, you're exactly right. All right, so tell me a little bit about taking that wealth of relationship knowledge. And we've had conversations with other veterans who have been in for different amounts of years. But what turns into sort of this, 2.0. Right. This next phase, you got all this experience. Talk to John Rennie about this after spending time in the Navy, and like now parlaying that into leadership experience, what that looks like for you through CRA Inc., Admired Leadership. And like, what do you like? You got a lot of good years left in front of you, God willing. You still got missionality in your heart, right? Like, what happens now?
Yeah. So the way I got to where I'm at is I think pretty insightful, and hopefully it'll be helpful to not just other veterans or other guys in special ops that are transitioning, but to people that are doing any kind of career pivot. And one of the challenges that I discovered is when you're a human Swiss Army knife, right? When you can go anywhere and do anything, nobody knows what to do with you.
Sure. Like, all those are great things, but like, what? Yeah. That it almost feels like a lot.
Yeah, and so people here in Tampa, when I was preparing to retire, and I was talking to there's different organizations out here. There's a great organization called the STAR Network, which is a Special Operations Forces Transition Assistance Resource. So it's a bunch of local business partners that are, a lot of cups of coffee and a lot of mentorship and development that happens.
Sure.
But they would say, well, what can you do? And I'd say, well, anything.
You can do it all.
Anywhere to do anything. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 years. And nobody really knows what to do with somebody that can do anything. They generally want to hear, I'm a this that wants to go there and do that.
Right.
And that they can work with. And I didn't have that answer. And I went through a fellowship with an organization called the Honor Foundation, which you've probably heard of. Big plug to them. They're a Navy SEAL Foundation sponsored charity to help special operators get back into the private sector. Honor.org. And they did all the things that you would normally expect to see in a program like that. Elevator pitch, resume writing, those kind of things. But one thing that they really did for me that was so consequential is that they had this thought project, and they presented 5 different categories to consider during any kind of career pivot. And it was location. So living where you work is what they called it. But so location is important to you for one reason or another. Loving what you do, loving who you do it with, your degree of work-life harmony and autonomy, and then finally your compensation. And the exercise.
I kind of like how that part's last.
Yeah, well, here's the point of this exercise, Brian. You only get to pick 3.
Oh, geez. You got to pick 3 of the 5 to focus on.
You have to pick 3 of the 5.
Run the 5 through for me one more time.
So
location. Where are you gonna be? Okay.
Loving what you do.
Loving what you do.
Loving who you do it with.
Loving who you do it with. Okay.
Your work-life harmony and autonomy.
Okay.
And then compensation.
Yeah, but bro, I want all 5. I want all 5.
And don't we all, right?
I want all 5.
That's the thing. So, and as part of this exercise, whenever you pick 3, they would take the 2 that you didn't pick and throw them in your face as if they didn't matter to you at all.
So I'm probably love what you do, the people you do it with, and the work-life balance.
So if I was playing this exercise on
right, can we do it?
You, so I would say, hey Brian, so what you're telling me then is you're willing to go anywhere in the world for crap pay as long as I give you a good team.
I know, but that doesn't help my family with some certain things that we're trying to accomplish. And I already got my kids in school here.
So those things weren't as important to you, right?
Well, they might not be as important. I mean, I guess, right? Like,
so what this did for me, I'll give you my example, right? I picked location, living where I work, loving what I do, and loving who I do it with. Leaving behind, and I'm agnostic to what anybody out there picks, by the way. I just think you should be honest with yourself on this. And I left behind your work-life harmony and autonomy, and then your compensation, right? And so what that did is it made me ask myself, why are those 3 things the 3 things I need to have in my ruck right now, and as opposed to the other 2, and why specifically are those 3 things important to me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to think through those answers, right? In my case, I had to move my eldest, my daughter. She's a sophomore in college now at University of Miami, but at this point in time, she was in high school, and I had to move her twice in high school.
Wow!
And I saw a little too late how traumatic that was for a young lady. When she was younger and she was kind of flexible and adaptable and more malleable, and she would every 2 years. I think we moved 11 places in her life. Right.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And it was just a grand adventure at that point. But then you're moving from this time in life where you're moving from approval and support of your parents to peer groups and social networks. And then I kept on pulling her out of that. And to some degree, I may have even been a little bit callous about it, where I was, we moved to Tampa, and she missed the cheerleading tryouts because they were before she got here. And I was like, oh, you'll stay next year kind of thing. Well, obviously that's a huge thing for a young lady in high school.
Right. And they're in there and now, right? Like that's her world.
So another failure, right, to identify these kind of things, right? And let's call it not a failure, just a learning process, because the learning process was that I was adamant I was not going to do that to my son, who's a freshman in high school right now. And so he was going to go to high school in one place. He was going to benefit from this experience. So location, living where I work, had to be important. So it had to be Tampa Bay or remote, right? And what that did is it essentially, to use a shooting term, it tightened up my shot group.
Yeah.
I went from a shotgun blast, I can go anywhere and do anything, to it's got to be Tampa Bay or remote. This is a small circle on the paper that I'm putting rounds on right here. This is what I'm aiming for. And when people would come up to me and say, hey, we got this great thing in Austin, I'd be like, don't even tell me. Don't say another word.
Not an option.
I don't want to hear it.
Not an option.
If it's not on this target where I'm shooting, I don't want to hear about it. Don't even distract me. Well, there's this thing in Seattle. Don't even say another word. I'm not moving my kid. It's got to be Tampa Bay or remote. And the love and what I do piece is, and this is not meant to be political, in any way. But when the January 6th thing happened, I happened to be sitting in the team house and looking at the screen, looking at the guys, looking at the screen, looking at the guys. I'm like, sitting here right in front of me is the entire geopolitical, sociocultural diversity of our country. And we're all willing to fight for each other. We're all willing to sacrifice for each other, all willing to take a bullet for each other. And then obviously we have this kind of just disparity happening in our own country where it's not like that. And it just struck me at the time as the absence of good leadership writ large in our society and our corporations and our government, even, and to a certain degree, even in our families, right? And I wanted to understand that better, and I wanted to move the needle on that. Is really what it comes down to. I said I want to change that. If I think of how this works, right, and I think Admiral Raven talked about this in a great sense in a speech there at the University of Texas, where he said, 8,000 graduates over if you change 10 people's lives relationally, in 5 generations you'll have affected 800 million people.
Wow.
And one generation past that, you'll have affected everybody in the world if you're able to do that, right? So with that as kind of a vision for myself, right? I want to move the needle on this. If I can do it with one individual and I can build a greater unity and sense of purpose and a sense of team around them and make them a better leader, then that's a win for me. If I can do that in another place, that's a win for me. And all of that over time hopefully moves the needle on some of this issue. And obviously, I'm used to small, highly performing teams that make a pretty big impact, that build a great sense of kind of these familial bonds and a great sense of team and a great sense of belonging and identity. And so I want to do those kind of things with people that are important to me, right? And so none of that, by the way, none of this exercise got me the job that I have, but it helped me see the opportunity when it presented itself that it was aligned with what I value. And then there's a final piece to this, and you got to be a little bit like the Jim Carrey character in Yes Man. Okay. Whenever an opportunity presented itself, I'll go out there and I'll talk to those guys. I'll see what this is about.
If it's tracking with the 3, right? Then let's go. Yeah.
And let's just see what happens, right? Let's just see what happens. There was a mentor I had in the Star Network here locally, and he was one of these guys with these crazy stories, right? About he had one kid, for example, that was into classic cars. And so he tells him, hey, we're going to go hop in a plane. We're going to go fly to Tampa, or fly from Tampa to LA. And we're going to the classic car show at the Staples Center. And you're going with me for the show they do every year. And in the plane, the kid's like, hey, there's this crazy garage out there in East LA that make these cool restorations. I want to check it out. So they show up there unannounced and try to talk their way into it. They didn't really have time. A woman gets out of a car. He starts chatting her up. She's the senior vice president of Hot Wheels. They're building a Hot Wheels pattern restoration inside this garage for the car show. She says, come with me. And those 2 jokers are on an episode of Pimp My Ride because they just happen to show up at the right time and place and get backstage passes from this woman. And they spend an hour on an XM radio broadcast the next day with Snoop Dogg. All that happens is just because you show up and you get out of your own way.
Yeah.
He had another kid that was into baseball, and over the course of high school, he took this kid to a game at every one of the Major League Baseball stadiums in the country. And so what happens, right? Obviously, you're building these bonds with your kid, but you're also talking to the person next to you in the plane or in the stands and exchanging cards. 5% of that turns into something in business.
Yeah.
So if you make excuses for yourself and you're like, I'm too tired, I don't know anybody there, we don't have anything figured out, then nothing's ever going to happen, right? So I took a lesson from that, and that just get out there and see what happens. And especially the baseball example, my kid comes home from school one day and he's like, hey, I want to go to a Tarpons game, which is a minor league affiliate for the Yankees that plays here at George Steinbrenner Field in Tampa. I want to go to a Tarpons game with my buddy and his dad. I'm like, all right, let's go. And it was a preseason game, so it's just the scouts and us, basically, right? And boys are running around catching foul balls, and we're sitting there drinking a beer, and we start talking about leadership. And I like to read the Stoics, and so I started talking about Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus, and he starts talking about Plato and Aristotle and virtue and expertise. And this is kind of the weirdest way for a couple of dudes to come hanging out at
Yeah,
a baseball
sure.
game,
Yeah, sure.
talking about these old dead guys. But we became friends and just developed a relationship. And he's a partner in the firm.
Nice.
And so, once again, it's relational, right? We became friends. We developed a relationship, and that's really, foundation of anything like that is trust, right? You develop trust over time with people and reliability in that sense. And that's how I got there, right? So that exercise was consequential because when they finally flew me out and I went to a firm meeting, 90 to 100 people, and I'm watching everybody, and I'm like, man, they really seem to like each other here. They really seem to get along really well, and like that. And I watch people hugging. The hugs are genuine, and there's no like little cliques forming and all this kind of stuff, and there's no personality conflicts that I can really see. And so then it hit me. Wait a minute, I get to live where I work, love what I do, and love what I do it with. Yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm good. So you got to know what you want. You got to know where to get it, and you got to be willing to put yourself out there enough to go find it, and let serendipity and providence work it for you.
And sometimes you just got to be willing to go. You got to be willing to just take the first step, get moving. I think oftentimes we let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and like, yeah, I got to get this right and get that right. Like, no, sometimes you just got to go. Like sometimes you sit around and you know that you were built to tell stories, and you've got a background in broadcasting. You're like, we're starting this podcast. This is what we did 2.5 years ago, right? It's time to start it, and let's put a little framework, a little structure around it. But there's no point in waiting. You don't have to wait around. And to your point, like you just got to be willing to put yourself out there sometimes, and have trust too. And I think hopefully, ideally, like you guys are like pen to paper, jotting down those 5 things Eric just talked about, and then think through that. Like take some time, man, set some time aside and think through those, right? Whether you pray on it, meditate on it, write on it, journal it, whatever your process is, and think through those. And then if you can come to a level of peace with what those 3 are, then you can return to them. How am I doing on living where I work? Well, check. We still live there, right? How am I doing on this? Loving what I do. How am I doing on, loving the people I'm around with, right? And then I think it gives you some metrics to be able to form up your own kind of set of standards and how you're looking at it, which is great.
Yeah, I think the key points there too with that exercise is realize that's not a fixed destination, right?
Right.
That those 3 of 5 change, right? I might say that, for example, in 4 years when my son has graduated high school, maybe living where I work isn't as important to me as it is right now, right? Maybe then I'll be more mobile, or something else will be more important. And so realize that's a moving metric at a certain point, right? But you have to be honest with yourself about those things. And then the other piece about this goes to your earlier point on being relational, is we oftentimes default, especially when it comes to rewarding people, with, well, I'm just going to give them a bonus, or I'm going to compensate them for it. And maybe that's not what's important to that person, right? Maybe if you pulled this exercise on anybody that you're working with, or that you've got on your team, you might find out that what they really need is some greater autonomy in their schedule because of different things going on with their family. Or maybe you're really focused on bringing people into the office, and right now they've got an elderly parent that they need to be close to so they can support. So living where they work is not as important, or more important, as the case may be. But what that requires you to do is to go deep and to develop a relational closeness with people, beyond what people are generally comfortable doing. And one of the things we talk about in my firm is vulnerability loops, and how you expand those with people to develop this sense of relational closeness. And what are the behaviors that make that work for people? And so, but this exercise is a great one to start.
Yep. All right. So people are going to be listening. They're like, well, can I hear Eric on the podcast? Obviously he's got to be writing a book about this at some point. So tell folks where they can find you, if you want them to connect with you, all that kind of stuff. Cause I'm sure they're gonna be like, man, I need some more of this.
Yeah. Happy to link up with anybody. Obviously I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm sure we'll post this out there, but admiredleadership.com is our firm. That's where you'll see a lot of the content. You can also look at crainc.com. That's going to have a lot of the offerings we do, but One thing that I'll push out to you it's on Substack, but you'll also be able to find it on the Admired Leadership site. Is we put out a daily field note, a daily 45-second read on a leadership topic that's consequential and hopefully hits hard. And that's a free subscription for anybody, right? You just put in your email and you can read that, and then that'll hopefully get you thinking about other aspects of how you can be more behavioral in your approach to being a better leader and building better teams.
I'm logging on right now, signing up for that. So
yeah,
looking forward.
Yeah, make that happen, and those are things to share, right?
Yep.
Because that's our firm's been around for 37 years, and so this is a lot of accumulated knowledge from that, of working with tens of thousands of leaders over time.
Yep.
And really seeing what the best leaders do. And if you look at our firm, and this is one thing that I really love, which is actually different than how we develop leaders oftentimes in the military, to be honest with you, is we're very behavioral. There's very little focus on psychometrics, on assessments like Myers-Briggs or Gallup strengths or those kind of things. You know, really, when it comes down to it, if you think about the best leaders that you've served with or that you've observed, even in your podcast, Brian, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell me what their Myers-Briggs personality profile was or any of those kind of things, right. but you know what they did. You know what they actually do every single day to be effective.
Yep.
And that's, generally speaking, where we lean and where we present. We present behaviors, and we work on developing those kind of behaviors and routines and rituals in leaders across all industries and sectors to make them better and more effective.
Awesome. Eric, it's been an absolute blast. If you guys like what you heard, which I know you have, please do us a favor. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this, hit that like button wherever you're watching or listening to this, and please feel free to send it to your friends. It helps us out a ton. He's Eric Springer. Eric's been just an absolute joy today, man. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to spend time with you, Brian. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. He's Eric Springer. I'm Brian Jodis. That's been this episode of Pick Up the Six Podcast.